On today's podcast, we talk with Oklahoma State champion head coach Keith Riggs and focus on some of the things that as coaches maybe we take for granted or we were really forced to look at in a crazy year and controlling what we can control. And to discuss some of those things, to discuss his championship with us is Coach Riggs. Coach, great to have you back here on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Keith. Appreciate it.
Well, Coach, a state championship in any year is a huge accomplishment. This is your 8th now as part of the Jenks staff. First as the head coach, you had been there the previous 2 years in the finals and were not able to get to the pinnacle, but that happened this year. How special is it, especially in 2020?
Well, as you mentioned, any state championship is special. It's so hard to win a state championship. Teams and programs that have won several in a row, it starts to kind of look easy on the outside, but it's so difficult. And especially in the face of a pandemic this year and all that we had to go through, in addition to a normal season, really made it special.
Coach, I want to dig into some of the things that you really took away from this season. Before we do that, we've had you on the podcast before, but our focus was more on the rivalry between Jenks and Union. I think you guys call it the backyard brawl. Is that right?
The backyard brawl, yes.
Yeah. And, so we focused on that one. We had you and Coach Frederick on, and we'll put that link here in the show notes. Just a great rivalry. But I want to dig into your background a little bit. I mean, obviously, Jenks is a storied program with multiple state championships, and a lot of that was under the late legendary coach, Allan Trimble. But talk to us about your starting and coaching, really those lessons that you learned early on that have been able to propel you to the position you're in right now to be able to take over a program like this.
Well, I got my start in a kind of a non-traditional way. I was in technology in the business world for about 17 years before I got into coaching. It's a long story, but just the short version is Coach Trimble allowed me to join his staff as an adjunct coach in 2003 and help with the defensive side, and fell in love with it. I love the game of football, but even more, I love being around these kids, helping kids grow up, become young men. And, over the years, Coach Trimble and so many coaches would tell you the same thing. He was such a great mentor and friend. I learned so much, not just about football from Coach Trimble, but about life, how you respond to adversity, how you deal with success. Nobody more successful in Oklahoma high school football than Coach Trimble, yet he was one of the most humble men I know. And so many wonderful lessons from him and such a great coaching tree. He's got a number of coaches with state championships that have gone on as from his assistant coaches to head coaches.
And I know for you, in talking with you back when you first got the job, such an honor to be able to step into that role, but some really big shoes to fill as well. What was your approach in taking over the program? And, you've already are, I think, performing as expected there, being able to get the team to the state finals 3 times in a row, win one here in 2020. But what was your approach in stepping into a program like this where, you did have Coach Trimble leading the program for a long time and legendary, not just in Oklahoma. I think everybody around the country knows Coach Trimble. So that's a big position to step into. What was your approach?
Well, I think, I had a lot of people, mention, it's big shoes to fill, or you don't want to follow a legend, or those sort of things. But for me, I really didn't look at it that way. And I think part of the reason is we were so close. We had such a great friendship. And for me, it was more about continuing his legacy, continuing and building on the things that he put in place here it's so difficult, I think, to develop a culture, the right culture in a program. And I didn't have to do that here. I just had to keep things going the right direction. And from that aspect, it made it easier. All the right things were in place when I took over this program. It wasn't like I had to rebuild or change the culture or, great support from administration, from our parents, from our community. Our kids are committed and believe in what we're doing. So all those things were in place. I just had to find a way to keep that going and both honor and continue Coach Trimble's legacy.
You were a part of building that culture over the years, so you certainly have the understanding of it. But now as the head coach, when you look at it, and especially, I'm sure people want to know about what is the culture at Jenks, what are the keys to that successful culture as you take a look at it now, especially sitting in the seat you do being the head coach?
Well, I think if you had to pick, just there's so many facets that go into, culture, and sometimes that's an overused word, but ultimately it's beliefs that drive action, and it's not my beliefs. It's got to be everybody in the program, their beliefs that drive the actions. And I think the overriding factor of it all is, if everybody in your program will make decisions based on what's best for the program, what can I do to help the program, then a lot of things take care of itself. And so, we stress, every person in our program, coaches, players, managers, trainers, they all add value to our program. And if they all look at it that way and they all understand the value they add and make decisions based on what is best for the program, you're going to have a chance to be really good.
Coach, I had Eric Kasparovich on from Pine Richland in PA, who just won his second state championship. And as he looked back at this season, what he realized was some of the restrictions in place, and it might be different for you in your state, but as an example, they didn't practice their JV team with their varsity team. Their freshman team was separate. They didn't actually go into their locker room. They weren't allowed in theirs. And he looked back on it and said, wow, there's a lot of challenges. We have that, things where we were building our culture. Some of those things just weren't in place this year. And, so this year was great, but we got to look at it for the future. So whether that's something like that or just other challenges you've seen along the way here in 2020, what's the approach to continuing to build that strong culture moving forward, especially with maybe some of those obstacles that have been in place and truthfully might continue to be put in place here as we're still in the pandemic?
Yeah, there certainly were some additional challenges from X's and O's all the way to building and developing culture within your program this year. A great example for us early on is, in the summer when we were finally allowed to start working out in the weight room with our kids, we had to do it in shifts. So a lot of our young guys weren't able to be around our older senior leader veteran guys to help learn those things and understand those things. And so the progress that comes along with that, the development of your young guys, maybe was a little slower this year because of the challenges involved. We were allowed to use our locker room, but we were, it was in and out, where typically the kids are hanging out, they get there early and, you have to push them out of the locker room at the end of the day. And now it was, you go in, you change, you get out. And so a lot of challenges there, but I think it, in the long term, and like you mentioned, we're not done with the pandemic yet. There's still some challenges involved that will come through offseason and possibly even into the spring and summer. You do have to find ways to develop that culture within your young players. And it's so important that much of that comes from your your other players, your older players that understand it, have lived it, know the importance of it, because it's a lot more valuable, I think, when your players are teaching and instilling your culture versus your coaches just doing it.
As you look at this next offseason, which is probably, if you haven't begun it already, you're set to start here sometime in the next 30 days or so. Again, some of those restrictions still in place. I know that the start of it is new, right? We all had the opportunity last year to kick off our offseason and to start building that next team and developing the leaders on that team, et cetera. This is kind of uncharted waters again for coaches, as you have to start an offseason with some of those restrictions in place, most likely. Any thoughts on the approach and maybe some things that you think are important in general for coaches to do as they kick off this offseason, again, under some new circumstances?
Well, still a lot of challenges ahead of us, definitely. We're looking because we do a great number of team building type activities, whether they're service projects, bringing in guest speakers, alumni to speak about the past and the culture. We're going to have to break those down into smaller groups. We still want to achieve the same things that we got out of those activities, but we're going to have to look for ways to break them down into smaller groups so we can get the same results without large groups being together. The weight room things and the conditioning and work things, I think, having been through last summer, all the things we had to do, I think that will be a relatively easy transition. We've kind of been through it once. How do you split up your guys to maximize your weight room work, get everybody through it, but minimize the number of players that are gathered at a time? All those things, at least we've now kind of been through with the summer and fall.
Coach, I know when you look back at this season, one of the things you mentioned to me that was something that the coaches really had to live up to was the idea of focusing on what you can control. We always talk about that as coaches. We always preach that. But you felt this year more than any, that was something you were really tested on, you and the staff. Talk to us about that, and what was the approach for you guys in being able to be that model of focusing on what you can control?
Well, yeah, that was so important this year. As long as I've been here at Jenks, we have preached that to our kids. There's so many things they don't control. Focus on the things you can control. But as coaches this year, there were so many more things that we had no control over. Having to minimize the size of our groups for weight room activities, for film sessions, not having the guys in the locker room very much, in and out, just change of clothes, sanitizing, before every event, in the middle of, every event. But then during the season, just you never knew what your roster was going to look like. And, there were times where, we were missing 20 or 30 kids off of our roster because of quarantines. And, you don't have any control over who's going to be there and who's not. And so as coaches, you have to be great role models of what it looks like to focus on things you can control. You can't control if you've lost 2 linemen for this week's game. What you can control is how you prepare. And I was really proud of our coaches, how they handled all that, especially as, things change from week to week between our roster, whether we missed 2 games because of COVID. But I was really proud of our coaches and how they handled that.
Looking at this past season, again, forced to do things way differently than before, whether it's meeting times where, as you said, and you guys have an incredible football building. I've been in it before. That's definitely a place to to have the kids hanging out, to build that camaraderie, to continue to build those bonds. So guys in and out of there, as you look at some takeaways from this season, is there anything that you really felt, wow, this is, never thought of doing things this way, but maybe we'll continue to do some of this as we move forward? Anything strike you as useful and new that might help you guys in the way you teach the game moving forward?
There's probably several things I would say, and not all of them are related to X's and O's, but our small meeting groups, being forced to always be in small meeting groups because we just didn't have, we have one large room for film, and you can't get everybody in there given our current, social distancing restrictions. But I think that really, in some ways, it helped our young guys. It allowed us to get a little more one-on-one with them when we were watching film with them. So I think we'll continue to do that. Maybe not every film session. I think they all need to hear the same things, sometimes in a large group, but we probably do need to have more small group film sessions and really get down on closer to a one-on-one level. Our school was kind of back and forth between distance learning and in-person learning. We had some players that opted to do all virtual classes. They all had those options, and that created some real challenges for us academically. Not everybody handles, the lack of structure that comes with distance learning. Some kids thrive in it, some don't. And one of the things that we implemented this year that I thought worked really well, that we'll probably continue to do down the road academically, is each coach was an academic advisor to anywhere from 6 to 10 kids on our roster. And so any grades that fell below A's and B's, we had up to 3 meetings with that player. They were very short meetings. They were just to touch base. Hey, where are we at? What assignments do you have due? Are you going to get them turned in on time? So then the next day, did you turn them in on time? Just to help follow up and give some focus so they don't lose sight of them, go home and forget about school because, I didn't have to go to school this day. And I thought that helped our kids, especially those, like I said, that maybe don't thrive in an unstructured environment.
You said when you look back at the season that it was a total team effort, even statistically looking at it, got different guys stepping up each week, whether it was on offense or defense, the guys playing for your defensive coordinator, Adam Gaylor, who we had on the podcast before. But on the field, how did, I guess, the approach you were forced to take here, and you're talking about, attention in small groups and things a little bit different this year. How did that play into, I guess, that total team effort on the field?
Well, I think because of the kind of the revolving door with our roster, with young men that got, close contact quarantined, just living the next man up is going to step in and perform. And didn't matter which position, didn't matter whether it was a senior or a sophomore. We had to have some guys come in and play that maybe in a normal year wouldn't have stepped on the field. And so preparing for that, trying to, within your practices, structure practices so that next guy up's ready to go if and when it happens, I think was another key factor for us because we had, and you always have injuries. Those are common every year. But when you pile on your normal injuries with 10, 15, 20 kids that are close contact quarantine and sitting at home waiting for their days to be up, you've got to have a team approach where whoever it is, regardless, is going to step in and do his job from week to week.
Coach, what was the approach with those players who weren't able to play? I'm sure, especially if that kid's a senior, and he's forced to sit out because of maybe he was tested positive, whether he actually had a ton of symptoms or not. How did you guys handle those guys, and I guess simple things like keeping their spirits up, because I'm sure they felt that they were letting the team down, but I guess keeping those guys involved and focused, because at some point they were probably going to come back and contribute.
Yeah, real challenge, and you hit it on the head. Just keeping their spirits up. 10 to 14 days, that's a long time to just be at home, not doing, when you're used to playing football and practicing every day and having a busy schedule day to day, that's a long time to sit at home. And so just keeping in regular communication with them, again, checking on their academic progress, it was an easy thing to contact them. Hey, how's it going? Our guys do a great job. And it was really important this year of watching film on their own through Huddle. So, we had a few guys that got quarantined more than once. So, some of them were out, 20-some days over the course of the whole season. But I think the key more than anything is just regular communication with them while they're going through that.
Coach, when you look at the importance of the season to your community as a whole, number one, being able to get the season in. I know, thinking back to July here and my son being a senior in our town and the way we feel about football too, every week just felt like a blessing. But, looking back on it, I think it was something that was really needed here. What was the feeling in your community about being able to play this season? And then obviously being able to take it all the way to a state championship. How important is football, I guess, to not just your community, but everyone as a whole?
Well, football is really important to our community, and I would say to our state, and I think it as unprecedented and with very little normalcy, we've had in 2020, that moment between the lines for that, 3 hours kind of felt normal. I know it did for me. It was the one time I kind of didn't have to worry so much about COVID. I mean, we still had, things we had to do on the sideline and so forth, but I think it brought a sense of normalcy to our team, our school, our community, and also our state being able to make it through the season. Because like you mentioned, there were times in the summer that we just weren't really sure if we were even going to get to play. So quite a blessing for all of us to be able to make it through the season and certainly to come home with the gold ball.
Coach, I know you guys do a lot of great things over there at Jenks, and as you being part of that staff for 8 state championships, you guys certainly know how to be successful. But for you look at all the things you do as a coach. What would be the one thing you really point to that gives your team the winning edge?
Oh, wow. I think, I don't know. That's hard to say. I have great coaches on my staff. I think it starts there because as a head coach, especially in a big program, but I think probably any program, you can't do it all alone. You can't install an offense, install a defense, install special teams, develop your leaders, and develop your culture. You can't do all those things by yourself, and I think it starts there. You got to have a great coaching staff. Coach Calabrese on the offensive side does an outstanding job for us. Coach Gaylor on the defensive side as well. And they will tell you they've got great guys that work for them as well. So I guess probably, having good coaches and then serving them and our kids, finding ways to help them be the best coaches they can be, finding ways to help our players reach their potential, help them go beyond what they believe their limits are. the X's and O's part's pretty easy, really, when it all comes down to it. It's those other things that are the real hard part.
Coach, for our listeners, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
I'm not really a social media guy. I have some accounts just to kind of keep up with things, but I don't know. Email probably is the easiest way. Keith.riggs@jenksps.org.
Well, Coach, I really appreciate you taking the time today. Again, congratulations to you and the Jenks Trojans on an incredible year here, and thank you for all you do to keep this game strong.
Thank you, Keith. I appreciate it.
Thank you again for listening to the Coaching Coordinator Podcast. Please, if you are enjoying the podcast, head over to iTunes or Spotify and click 5-star for a rate. If you have a minute, write a review. It really helps the podcast. Check out our new home for the Coaching Coordinator Podcast. That's at coachandcoordinator.com. And follow me on Twitter at Coach K. Grabowski.